Today it's hard to imagine, but there was a time in American history when capitalism didn't just feel unfair. It felt unbalanced, combustible, almost as if it might destroy itself. The country was growing wealthier at a pace never seen anywhere else in the world, yet that wealth was concentrating in the hands of a tiny elite. For everyone else, life was a difficult struggle defined by dangerous work, violent cycles of economic crisis, and a political system effectively bought by those with immense financial power. The problem wasn't just inequality. It was something deeper: imbalance. The kind of imbalance that bends a society until it's ready to break. At the time, the idea that the government could do anything about it seemed almost impossible. The oligarchs were too powerful. The political machine was too corrupt. The system was too deeply entrenched. And yet, this is exactly the moment when America made a radical attempt to fix capitalism before it could destroy itself. To understand everything, you have to step back into the late 1800s, an era of explosive growth and almost no rules. Railroads connected the continent. Steel poured into skyscrapers and factories. Oil lit up the world. Big finance fueled every expansion. It was the birth of the modern economy. But it came with a dark twin: the rise of private empires that overshadowed the nation itself. John D. Rockefeller didn't just dominate the oil market, he dictated its terms. J.P. Morgan didn't simply run a bank; with a single phone call, he could move the entire economy. Andrew Carnegie, Jay Gould, and others built systems where competition wasn't something to win, it was something to eliminate. Wealth wasn't just concentrated. It was weaponized. Meanwhile, the working class faced a reality that today feels almost dystopian. 12 to 14-hour shifts were standard. Coal miners slowly inhaled death. Steel workers died young. 8-year-old children were sent into factories and mines, not because their parents were cruel, but because survival demanded it. There were no safety regulations, no social protections, no unemployment insurance, no minimum wage. If you died at work, the company replaced you. If you protested, private detectives, militias, or federal troops showed up. The economy was growing, but in ways that punished the very people sustaining it. The political system offered little relief. Senators were effectively for sale. Newspapers were bought by trusts to shape public opinion. Even the courts often sided with the corporations they were supposed to restrain. Democracy wasn't dead, but it was so corrupted that, to many Americans, the government looked less like a public institution and more like a subsidiary of railroads, steel companies, and banks. Then came the crashes. The Panic of 1873 triggered a 6-year depression. Banks collapsed, railroads went bankrupt, unemployment surged. In 1893, the country was shaken again. Hundreds of banks and thousands of businesses vanished almost overnight. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877 erupted into violent clashes across multiple cities. These weren't isolated financial events. They were systemic failures. Americans began to realize that the economy wasn't just unfair, it was unstable, fragile, and controlled by private interests powerful enough to steer or break the entire system. But here's the part people forget: the country didn't give up. It didn't accept inequality as a law of nature, monopolies as inevitable, or workers as disposable. Instead, an unlikely coalition, journalists, reformers, lawyers, unions, and even a few presidents, decided to push back. The first crack appeared in 1890 with the Sherman Antitrust Act. On paper, it was simple: combinations and conspiracies that restrained trade were illegal. In practice, it was initially almost impossible to enforce. Courts were hostile, corporations found loopholes, and political will was weak. But the importance of the law wasn't immediate enforcement. It was symbolic. For the first time, America declared that the economy was not the private property of a handful of men. It was a public arena, and public arenas have rules. Then came the journalists, the muckrakers, as Theodore Roosevelt called them, not as an insult but with respect. Ida Tarbell exposed the ruthless tactics of Standard Oil. Upton Sinclair infiltrated the meatpacking industry and wrote The Jungle, shocking the nation. Change wasn't driven by ideology. It was driven by disgust. When Americans saw what unregulated capitalism actually looked like behind the curtain, public opinion shifted, slowly at first, then decisively. Reform was no longer a luxury. It became a survival strategy. The turning point was Theodore Roosevelt. Energetic, aggressive, almost theatrical, he understood something fundamental: a president doesn't just enforce rules, he shapes the narrative of what a fair economy should look like. When he filed a lawsuit against Northern Securities, a massive railroad monopoly backed by J.P. Morgan, he wasn't just initiating a legal case. He was declaring the end of untouchable private empires. He strengthened railroad regulation, pushed Congress to expand federal oversight, and redefined the presidency as a counterweight to corporate power. Roosevelt wasn't against big business. He was against business that had grown so large it threatened the republic. Still, even he couldn't prevent the next crisis, the Panic of 1907. When the financial system froze, it wasn't the government that stepped in. It was J.P. Morgan. He gathered bankers in his library, locked the doors, and forced them to coordinate a rescue. It worked, but it terrified the country. One man had effectively acted as the central bank. That was unacceptable. In 1913, America created the Federal Reserve, not as an abstract financial tool, but as a direct response to the danger of private individuals controlling the nation's economic lifeblood. Reforms spread into labor. Child labor laws began pulling children out of factories and into schools. Workplace safety standards emerged. States experimented with workers' compensation. The 8-hour workday, once unthinkable, became a real movement. The 16th Amendment introduced the federal income tax, finally giving the government a tool to challenge concentrated wealth. For a time, it worked. America didn't destroy capitalism. It disciplined it. It reshaped the system to serve many instead of a few. But the story doesn't end there. Because history has a habit of cycling. The reforms didn't fail. They were forgotten. And in economic history, forgetting is never neutral. It's always a choice, a drift, a slow erosion. Not through a single decision, but through lobbying, neglect, and the revival of an old myth. That markets regulate themselves. That concentrated wealth is efficient. That private interest naturally produces public good. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, a new ideology took hold, one that saw regulation as a burden, antitrust enforcement as unnecessary, unions as obstacles, and taxing the wealthy as both morally and economically wrong. Step by step, decade by decade, safeguards were dismantled. Financial barriers were lowered. Corporate mergers expanded with little scrutiny. Top tax rates fell dramatically. Campaign finance laws weakened. Private money flowed deeper into politics. Unions declined as manufacturing jobs were automated, outsourced, or systematically undermined. As capital became more mobile, ordinary workers lost bargaining power. This didn't happen all at once. It happened through thousands of small legal cuts, each defended as modernization, each quietly restoring the very forces earlier reformers had fought. Today, the numbers are stark. The top 1% of Americans hold roughly 40% of the nation's wealth, among the highest levels in modern history. The bottom half holds just 2 to 3%. In 2023 alone, the 19 richest households added nearly $1 trillion to their wealth. $1 trillion divided among fewer than 20 families. If that sounds like 1890, it's not a coincidence. The architecture of inequality has been rebuilt, taller, sleeker, more global, and far more insulated from democratic pressure. Look at labor. The original Gilded Age was defined by dangerous jobs and no protections. Today, children aren't sent into coal mines, but the pressures feel familiar. Wages have stagnated for decades. Housing and healthcare costs have surged. Millions of workers cycle through unstable jobs without benefits. In some states, child labor protections are quietly being rolled back, allowing teenagers to work longer hours with fewer safeguards. Different era. Different industries. Same underlying pressure. When the system is strained, the first thing sacrificed is protection for the most vulnerable. Corporate power has also evolved. Standard Oil became tech giants. Steel trusts became global private capital. Rail monopolies became digital platforms controlling supply chains, advertising markets, data flows, and access to economic life itself. Old monopolies bought newspapers. New ones shaped the information environment itself, algorithmically, invisibly, and at a scale unimaginable a century ago. And once again, the political system struggles to restrain them, not because laws don't exist, but because enforcement is weak, lobbying is deep, and the market will fix it, has become a bipartisan reflex. So here we are again. Extreme wealth concentration. Fragile labor. Political capture. Rising public anger. A second Gilded Age, wearing modern clothes, but following the same script. It's natural to feel pessimistic. But history doesn't point us there. The first progressive era wasn't about despair. It was about transformation. Inequality didn't destroy the country. It forced it to change. And the most important part: America didn't fix the Gilded Age by accident. It didn't rely on charity or the invisible hand. Reform happened because ordinary people demanded it. Because journalism exposed abuse. Because politicians felt pressure. Because crisis made the cost of inaction undeniable. Those forces still exist. They're not gone. They're dormant. The safeguards that once disciplined capitalism still exist, in law, in precedent, in institutional memory. Antitrust can be enforced. Labor protections can be strengthened. Social safety nets can be rebuilt. Financial regulation can be restored. The system is not beyond repair. What's been inconsistent is the will to repair it. That will rises in crisis and fades in comfort. But history shows the pendulum always swings back. Because societies cannot sustain extreme inequality indefinitely. If the Gilded Age teaches us anything, it's this. The rules of capitalism are not fixed. They are written by people, shaped by politics, enforced by institutions, and rewritten when they stop serving the public. The wealthiest may have influence, sometimes enormous influence. But the country is bigger than any elite. That was true in 1900. It is true in 2025. The fact that today's inequality resembles the Gilded Age is not proof that reform is impossible. It's proof that reform is necessary. When the system feels unbalanced, it's not the end. It's a signal. A signal that a new era of reform is overdue. A century ago, Americans reimagined their economy. They broke monopolies, protected workers, regulated finance, and built the foundations of the middle class. Not perfectly. Not completely. But they did it. And they succeeded for the same reason it's still possible today. The rules of the economy are human-made. And what humans make, humans can change. History doesn't repeat. But it rhymes. And the last time inequality looked like this, the country didn't collapse. It pushed back. It rewrote the rules. It forced capitalism to work for many, not just a few. This isn't nostalgia. This is precedent.